Good afternoon, everyone. Today I want to continue and finalize my discussions about what happened at Jackson Hewitt and how we grew that. But I want to start with talking about thinking outside the box. One of my employees came to me at Liberty Tax 20 years ago, or 15, 20 years ago, and he said, I had an epiphany last night. He said, you're always trying to get us to out of the box and thinking out of the box. And you pull us out of the box and then we pop back right back in. And he said, I just realized that you never in the box. You never think inside the box. And really, if you're going to have extraordinary success, you have to ignore the limitations that society tries to put on you, and that others try to regulate your situation. It seems like everyone tries to bring you back to normal when you're abnormal, when abnormally successful. People try to bring you back to normal. And I did in Rich Dad Poor Dad, in one of the later books, he said 90% of people in life give you advice. And he said, but only 5% are successful. So why you listen? And that makes so much sense, that you will get constant advice as to not step out of the box, not think creatively, and not do something that's never been done before. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that, this story has never been replicated. I've told this story hundreds of times. It's never been replicated to my knowledge. But my oldest daughter was incredibly talented, and when back in the '80s, when we were first starting Mel Jackson Hewitt, she worked as a receptionist starting at about 16 during the tax season, and she was extraordinary. She great at customer service, great at juggling everything that in a busy office. This office was one of the busiest offices in the country. It grew to 5,000 customers it was Ward's Corner in Norfolk, Virginia, and she went to school for marketing, and and we were just getting ready to expand Jackson Hewitt and go national. And I heard people ask her, "Are you going to work for your parents?" And she said, "No way, no way." And I can understand that. I'm a pretty strict parent, and so she wanted to get out from under the strictness of her parents. And so, but I wanted her to work for me. So I came up with again, thinking outside the box, I came out with a program for her that, again, I've never seen anyone replicate this. So I said to her, I went to her in December of her senior year in college. And I said, and again, her degree was in marketing. And I said to her, how about if we make a deal that you take the last semester of college off, but you have to promise to go back in the fall to complete your degree, and we have you travel around the country and teach the Jackson Hewitt system. And it'll look great on your resume. You'll earn some money, be great on your resume. And she didn't even hesitate. She said, yes. And it worked. It worked as best as I could even imagine. First of all, she did a great job. She went around the country teaching the system and preaching the gospel, if you will, of our systems and procedures and policies at Jackson Hewitt. And then, so had a great tax season. She had a great time. Came back, and now it's May, and she needed a job between May and September when school started. So we put her in the training department. Her mother was director of training at Jackson Hewitt. We put her in the training department. She did a great job. She loved teaching and got along great with all of the new franchisees. And we're bringing in 20 new franchises a month back then. And so there'd be a full training, 30, 40 people each month. Worked out great. She worked until September. Then she went back to school. She got her degree as she promised. And then now it's January. Well, guess what happens in January? It's tax season again. And so she started working for us at Jackson Hewitt in another season of traveling around and teaching the system. And so she ended up coming to work full time for Jackson Hewitt. By the time she was 24 years old, she was the vice president. She was so talented that I had her by the time she was 25, she was managing the Walmart account. And today, 30 years later, the Walmart is they're half of Jackson Hewitt locations. They're in almost 3,000 Walmarts. And she was handling the account back then. We were only in a few hundred, but she was handling that relationship. She's that talented. And so that was all out of the box. I came up with that. It worked perfect. Not every idea works, obviously, but it was, again, thinking outside the box. Another example of thinking outside the box is I talked last show about the refund anticipation loan and getting your money in. Originally, when it started, you would get it in 3 days, and then went down to 1 day, and then it went down to an hour, and then it went down to instantaneously over the years. But we saw that we were bringing the business to the banks, and they were making all the profit. Now, it was very useful for us because it was a competitive advantage. But we said, well, wait a minute, we're bringing these tens of thousands, and it ended up hundreds of thousands of customers to the bank, and they're making about $30 every customer. And we said, well, we were a little jealous of that why shouldn't we get a piece of that? And so we actually, my dad, and I don't remember how we found this bank or if he had known them. He was CFO of a public company. I don't remember if he had known them or he found them, but it was Republic Bank of Philadelphia. And it was a small bank with just a handful of branches, maybe 3 branches. And that we convinced them to participate in the loan process. And so we, in turn, we shared the responsibility, we shared the risk, and we also got part of the profits from lending the customers money. So we were the only ones doing that in the industry. Now, of course, we were second largest. H&R Block was largest. H&R Block, I guess they had a different type of deal with Beneficial Bank, but they also shared in that. It was a competitive advantage to the mom and pops because the mom and pops did not have the clout to share, to get a share of the profits from the banks. And so we had a profit sharing relationship. Now, along the way, we ran into another situation with another bank that the industry changed in 1995. I got a call in October of 1994. First time I ever got a call, and the only time I ever got a call from the IRS commissioner. And the IRS commissioner called up and said, and followed it up in writing, but the direct deposit indicator, which tells the bank whether the customer is going to pay, whether the customer is going to receive their refund or not, we're taking that away. We're not going to have that this year. And that alarmed everyone in the industry, and there were three major banks in the industry, and a couple minor ones, and one was Republic Bank. And Republic Bank, then they withdrew from the industry. Well, and two of the major banks withdrew from the industry. So it was only Beneficial Bank and Chemical Bank, which at the time in 1994 was third largest bank in the United States. They had tested getting into the refund anticipation loan business in that tax season, 1994. And they had struggled, and they had only had maybe 100,000 customers, where there were 10 million. There were 8 million customers in the country getting loans, and they only did about 100,000, handled about 100,000. They were dealing with mom and pops, and they wanted to grow that. And they came to us at the same time as we lost our relationship with Republic. Chemical Bank came to us and said, well, we'd like to have your business. And so it was perfect timing for us. God works in strange ways, and for them, and because they didn't have a good way of decision making. They had no decision making experience on loans other than the direct deposit indicator. And we had been in the business for now 6 or 7 years, so we had some experience and ability to analyze our customer base, analyze the customers that weren't receiving their refunds, and make a good lending decision, or informed lending decision. So Chemical Bank, we had the same type of relationship with Chemical Bank that we had with Republic Bank, and we went into the 1995 tax season, which was the most disastrous tax season in my 55 years, that was caused by a simple programming error by the IRS. What the IRS did, and of course, there's fraudulent returns. There's fraud in returns that are filed, and it's whatever the number is, 2%, 3% of returns are fraudulent. And so the IRS had put in new software to test their whether a return was fraudulent or not. Well, they made a mistake, and they put in too broad of a net to catch fraud. So they came up with a plan that they were going to put returns aside, and this happened the same time they got rid of the direct deposit indicator. They were putting in this fraud detection that was a disaster. What happened is they held over 30% of the refunds early in the season. And what they did is they held the return and said, they put it into a separate bucket and said, and told, finally, they didn't admit this until February, and that caused huge problems in the industry, because when the taxpayers didn't get their money, the 30% of the customers didn't get their money, the IRS, and they called the IRS, and they weren't communicating well internally. And so they would say, we're not doing that. We don't have your money. Your tax preparer has your money. And so we had bomb threats, we had fist fights, we had people with guns in our office demanding their refund. And it was a disastrous tax season. When we found it, we didn't find out until, I don't remember the exact date in February, but it was the first Friday in February when customers were getting paid. And it was whatever it was Black Friday, February 3rd, 1995. And they held 30% of the refunds up. And they told those customers, we're going to put it into a separate bucket, we'll mail your refund in 10 weeks. Well, not only did they hold the refunds up, but the banks who had been lending money and the under the auspices of a direct deposit, the way the bank got repaid was we would set up an account for the customer, and the customer, the IRS would electronically file or direct deposit the money into that bank account, and the money be in the bank account for a nanosecond, and then the bank would take it out and repay themselves for the loan, and they would pay the taxpayer for their tax prep fee, and then the remainder we would print out in our offices at Jackson Hewitt or Block or whatever. We would print out a check and hand it to the customer. Well, the IRS, because they put it into this special bucket, didn't repay the banks. And so the money they sent directly to the customer. So you can imagine how many people who receive, you can only imagine how many people receive their money 10 weeks late, their $3,000 check, and came rushing in to pay the bank back the $3,000 that they had been already fronted by the bank. So it was a disastrous tax season. We didn't get paid. Our franchisees didn't get paid for the tax preparation fee. The bank didn't get paid back, and we had guaranteed loans. So at the end of the season, we had about, our share was $1 million that we owed the bank that wasn't paid. Now, we had in the industry, the beneficial bank sued the IRS, and they settled the suit that summer for an agreement that if they ever held money again, like they did that tax season for the 10 weeks, they would send the money to the bank and not send it to the customer. So that was settled by September, October. They had agreed that that would never happen again. And back then, there was cross collections between the banks, so that if one bank got a loan the next year and the person hadn't repaid, then the money would go to that bank. So we recouped all the money next year and had an incredibly great year. But in the meantime, it was we almost at Jackson Hill, we almost went bankrupt. Now, in the course of that off season of almost going bankrupt, Chemical Bank, we owed them $1 million. We didn't have $1 million, right? Because our franchisees didn't get paid. They didn't pay us, and so it was the worst disastrous year ever. It was so bad that Tom Block resigned on April 9th of 1995, and it was so bad that our venture capitalists tried to take the company and steal the company, and that's why I ended up leaving Jackson Hewitt, is because of that fight. And our venture capitalists came in and said, John, you go to the IRS and tell them, I don't care if you give the customer their money, they have to give us our tax preparation fees. Like anyone human being could talk to the IRS like that is unimaginable. No one has that. I mean, the IRS is the most powerful agency in our government. They have incredible power, and that's why everyone fears them. So it was a disastrous time. To make it worse, not only didn't we get our royalties, and our bank that had a line of credit, they temporarily suspended our line of credit because of we didn't meet our profit, our requirements that we had to do to keep the line of credit. So, and then on October 31st, the Chemical Bank sued us. And I remember that date specifically because that was the end of a quarter. We were a public company. And for some reason, my CFO, who was very, very conservative normally, he every quarter when you are a public company, you have to publish a quarterly report, and it has to be reviewed by the auditor. And for some reason, my CFO, we got it on the very last day of the quarter, and then when we announced a week later, he hadn't told the auditors, and so I had to sit at a board meeting, and he didn't tell me that he had got it exactly on October 31st, that notice that we were sued. And so in November, we filed a report that we had to amend because he didn't say to the auditors that we had been notified that we were being sued. And so we got scolded in a director meeting by our directors. And as the right thing to do as a leader, I sat there and took the abuse without saying. I did not raise my hand and say, "Oh, by the way, Chris didn't tell me this either." I took the abuse for my team, because when you're CEO, the buck stops here. But the reason for the chemical bank part of the story is I made one of the best deals I ever made in my career with Chemical Bank. So we had the total receivables due to us and Chemical Bank combined was about $3 million. And we had guaranteed $1 million of it. Now, in addition to that, Chemical Bank had done another in their non-Jackson Hewitt portion of they had done another $3 million. So they had losses of $6 million, and they sued us to get paid the $1 million that we had guaranteed. So we didn't have the money, and so we entered into an agreement that we could make payments, and most of the money would be paid during the tax season. However, in exchange for making that deal, that we would pay them $1 million. And I don't remember the exact terms. Maybe it was $100,000 down in December, and then in February pay them $300,000, in March pay them $300,000, in April pay them $300,000. So we were getting paid when we had positive. Most of the money was being paid back to them when we had positive cash flow. But Chemical Bank was inexperienced in the industry, and they didn't know that most of that $6 million was going to be recovered over the next few years. If someone ever wanted a loan again, they would have to come in and file their tax return, and the banks would hold that money and pay the bank for the money that the IRA that customer had welched on, had not paid that previous tax season, that most of that money was going to be paid. So we got them to agree that we got the whole $6 million loan portfolio and was going to be recouped by us. They gave up their rights to the $6 million. So over the next few years, we recouped most of that money. So in exchange for paying the $1 million that we rightfully owed them, and we were going to pay them, is just as soon as we had the cash, in exchange for what we were already going to pay, $1 million, we got $3 or $4 million of payments from customers that were past due, because we got the whole loan portfolio. So again, that was thinking outside the box in a number of ways. Number one is going to the banks and being able to have the clout to make a deal and to guarantee it, and get a portion of the profits. And then that deal where they gave up all of their receivables for just amount they would have been paid anyway, and they abandoned the industry. They left the industry and were never in the industry again. So a little color on my leaving, leaving Jackson Hewitt. So we had an amazing, horrible year, and everyone was distressed. The company stores lost money, the franchisees lost money, the industry was, as I said, Tom Block, the last Block, Henry Block's son, the last Block that ever worked there, resigned on April 9th because the stress was it was so amazingly stressful and there was a concern throughout the certainly the non-tax prep industry that H&R Block was, I'm sorry, that the IRS would continue to do that it would happen next year, and who could, and then so you're not a viable company anymore because these customers aren't ever going to be able to pay you, and it could happen again. Why can't it happen next year? Well, fortunately, they settled very quickly and agreed, just by agreeing, that they would pay the payments to the bank. But if you're outside the industry, that's the whole refund anticipation loan concept is foreign to a normal bank, because the people, for example, the people that were getting the loan, their credit scores were horrible. They couldn't get a loan any other way except for the collateral of their refund. And so it went against all banking kinds of philosophy. And the total fee was under $50. And a normal bank can't put a loan on the books for under $200 or some far greater number. So it ran contrary to their way of thinking. And so only a few banks entered this business, and it was incredibly profitable because the computer did all the work. The computer set up the bank account. The computer then refunded the money back into the account for a minute and a nanosecond, and then took the money out of the account. And it was volumes. It was done 8 million times, and so the profit on the $50 fee was like 70%, because the money was lent for such a short period of time. It was lent for less than 3 weeks, and there was almost no manual intervention. It was all done by the software, and so extremely lucrative, but it was hard to understand. So when we went out to see, I learned a valuable lesson on venture capital and private equity, that when you start your partnership with private equity or venture capitalists, both of you have a 5 to 7 year window. I mean, both of you are thinking long term, and the problem is they're only thinking 5 to 7 years most of the time. Most of the venture capital or the private equity that I've dealt with are not thinking 10, 20, 30 years of being involved. They're thinking of their exit in 5 to 7 years. Well, in year one, when you're both thinking long ahead and you both have the same priorities and goals and philosophies, and we're thinking we're going to build this thing long term and build it well and build it fast. Well, after you're in your third or fourth year, then they're starting to have an eye for, okay, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to how am I going to take my game and realize it and put it in the bank? And so the goals of venture capitalists and private equity changes as they're long in the tooth in their investment. They're looking for that exit strategy. And so their goals change to short term. And they're looking at, forget about some investment that helps us in long term. We want to maximize our profit for the short term so that when we sell, we can get the highest price per share. So the quarterly and the yearly financials become far more important as they approach their due date for whatever they're mentally thinking of in their investment. And again, most of them that I've dealt with, negotiated with, and dealt with many dozens of private equity and venture capital, and most of them are in the 5 to 7 year range, some longer. But they change, and they're not your their philosophy is different as you approach that time frame. And then there's another thing with private equity and venture capital, and that is that they feel that in a fast growing company like a Jackson Hewitt or a Liberty or a Loyalty Brands, they feel that the CEO is not going to be able to make it all the way through. That, yeah, he can run a $10 million company or a $50 million company, but by the time it gets to 300 million, 500 million, so we're going to have to change CEOs. We're going to have to bring in a real CEO, a suit to run the company. And so it's venture capital 101 that they plan on your exit as CEO. They plan on your exit as soon as they feel the company outgrows you. Well, in this case, there was another lesson that our stock on the stock exchange went from based on this tax season that in 1995, and it went from $17 a share down to $2.50. And the venture capitalists put together a group and tried to buy the company for about $2 a share. And I don't remember the exact number, but it's less than $3 a share. And we were able to solve the problem, go to the bank, our original line of credit bank, with a 14-step program of how we were going to get through from May to January, and that eventually get the bank to give us a $3 million line of credit that we needed to get through that period, including paying the payment to Chemical Bank, the down payment to Chemical Bank. But the company, that was in September, October of 1995. 24 months later, the company was sold for $68 a share. So that the venture capitalist was trying to buy it for less than $3 a share. And 24 months later, it was $68 a share, sold for $68 a share. So learned a valuable lesson in that. But in that fight to get the line of credit, the venture capitalists turned there were 4 board members, because one had resigned because of the fighting that was going on inside between me and the venture capitalists. One of the board of members resigned, and it came down to, we had 4 board members, and one of them was the venture capital, and he convinced one of the other board members to get on his side, and I had one on my side. So he wouldn't let us take the line of credit, and the guy that I had trusted, the non-venture capital guy that I had trusted before, he turned against us, and he sided with the venture capitalists, and so we couldn't take the loan. So in the fall of 1995, we reached an agreement that I would, if the agreement was that these are the basics of the agreement, that if that venture capital would leave the board and put on another venture capitalist on the board who I like, and that I would leave after the end of the tax season, after April 30th of 1996. And it was so important for me to stay, because our franchisees were in disaster. Our employees were in, I mean, it was like rescue. I mean, we had to continually to morale, to keep them motivated and their head in the game. And it turned out incredibly well. 1996 was virtually the best tax season I ever had. Not only did we have a great growth, because so many of our competitors had gone out of business, including some H&R Block locations. Um, so many competitors had gone out of business that we had an incredible year, but we got paid back all the money that we weren't paid in 95 was now paid in 96. So we got 2 years of payments for tax preparation. And it was incredible. It was the best year ever, best growth ever. And so the stock jumped up, and the company became much more valuable, and our franchisees prospered, and the customer prospered, and I'm sorry, the franchisees prospered, the company prospered, and we sold an amazing amount of franchises because everyone was so happy. The secret of franchising is happy, successful franchisees, and they were ecstatic, and they had come from the heights of depression to just rolling in success and cash, and it was a great time. But I did leave the company then as scheduled. I left the company in summer of 1996, but I was still on the board, still chairman of the board. And I stayed as chairman of the board, and on the board, I stayed on the board of directors until December. And I don't usually talk about what happened when we, again, thinking outside the box. I had grown up in Buffalo, and when I left the company, I had a 3-year non-compete when I left Jackson Hewitt, but Jackson Hewitt had never gone to Canada. Having grown up in Buffalo, I knew the Canadian tax system, so I had done Canadian returns, and I saw how successful H&R Block was, and probably no other human being almost alive remembers this, but back in the 60s and early 70s, tax season in Canada ends on April 30th. And just as we do in the United States, we have all the procrastinators that wait until April to file their tax returns in the United States. Half of the country files their tax return after April 1st. Canada has a tax season ending April 30th. And so they have this huge rush in between April 15th and April 30th. So they would pay, H&R Block would pay preparers in Buffalo, which is, as you know, just right across the river from Canada, to come over to Canada and do Canadian tax returns from April 16th until April 30th. So we knew the tax system, and we looked for an opportunity in Canada. We found a company called U&R Tax Depot, U&R. So they had done a takeoff on H&R Block. They had done, and they've been sued by Block, by the way, for confusingly similar name, but it was called U&R Tax Depot, and it was a franchise organization, and they had gone bankrupt a couple years before we approached them, and they were bought by a family-owned company that was called Farm Business Bureau. So they did accounting and tax returns for 99% of their customers were farmers, and they were huge. They were hugely successful, and it was run by a father and son. And they had bought U&R Tax Depot out of bankruptcy, and so I remember going to up to meet with them for the first time right after I left Liberty. We flew up, I think, in either January or February. I left Jackson Hewitt rather in December. Went up in January, February. I was in Vegas, and it's a short flight from where they're headquartered in. I guess the father and son were headquartered in Calgary, and U&R Tax Depot was headquartered in Winnipeg. And we happen to be, it's only about an hour and a half flight from Vegas to Calgary. It takes, from Virginia Beach, it takes us about 8 hours to get to Calgary or Winnipeg, but it only took us an hour and a half out of Las Vegas. And a strange experience. This is long before they had security at airports, and you didn't need a passport to get into the United States. I'm sorry, you didn't need a passport back then in the 90s to go from the United States to Canada. But you did on an airplane, it turns out. So we didn't realize that I crossed the border hundreds of times from Buffalo to Canada without a passport, but never knew that if you flew, you were supposed to have a passport. So we got to the airport and we were ready to fly, and they said, you don't have a passport. So it was funny that this is very funny to me. They made us sign a statement and said, since you don't have a passport, you have to sign a statement that, and it was a typewritten statement of about 30 words that, yes, you are a US citizen, and yes, I promise to obey the law, and blah, blah. I mean, all you had to do was sign you were supposed to have a passport, but they let you go if you signed a statement that without any other requirements. And so that was a surprise. So we arrive in Calgary, and I hadn't been in the part of Canada that the eastern part that's close to Buffalo doesn't have this, but it's so cold out in the western provinces that oftentimes you have to plug in your car at night to keep it warm so the engine doesn't freeze. And I thought when I learned that, and we arrived at the hotel, went to and when you rent a car, there's a plug sticking out of the radiator that you plug into when you go to the garage at the hotel. And I would have thought it was so the water in the radiator doesn't freeze, but the reason you have to plug in your car is so that the oil doesn't freeze and your engine seizes up. So it's often cold enough in January and February in those provinces Western provinces that your oil would freeze if it wasn't being warmed by being plugged into the electricity. So, but in any event, we went up to negotiate with them and tried to buy the company. And it turned out that the owner of the business, Farm Bureau, was his name is Gary Ibbotson, and we said we'd like to buy this, and they said, well, instead of us selling it to you, how about if we enter a partnership and we own part of it, and that's the deal that we struck. We acquired a majority share of UNR Tax Depot from the owners, and they kept a minority share. And all we had to do was lend the company $1 million Canadian. This is Canadian, of course, dollars. We lent them $1 million Canadian, and they gave us more than 50% of I forget the amount we own, call it 65, 70%. We owned 65 or 70%. Well, it turned out to be they were running a company that wasn't making any money and was floundering. And it was a group of 70 or 80 stores. And they were floundering because they weren't really it was more of an association of mom and pops than it was a true franchise system. They didn't have a system. There was much of a system. So we came in and, I had already built Jackson Hewitt up. About the time it was almost $500 million company. So I had shown that I could build tax companies, and they were believers, and they took a minority interest. And then it turned out well for them. Not only did we build that business up to be incredibly successful, but as Gary Ibbotson, the owner of Farm Bureau, became one of our first investors in Liberty Tax. And we eventually changed the name of UNR Tax Depot to Liberty Tax. And remember, I talked about changing the name of Mel Jackson Tax to Jackson Hewitt. Well, the same thing happened with us in Canada, that there was another UNR Tax Depot that in one of the eastern provinces in Canada, and that was in a lawsuit with us over the name. They had the same name, and or a very similar name, and so to drop that lawsuit, we changed the name in Canada to from UNR Tax Depot to Liberty Tax. And Gary Ibbotson he went on to invest, I think he invested about $2 million in 1999 in Liberty Tax. And many years later, that grew to $50 million. So, he was a great angel investor for 15 years, and a great supporter. He's actually put his son on the board of directors of Liberty Tax. He's semi-retired, and he had about 50 different businesses. But we were faced with adversity when we acquired UNR Tax Depot. Most of the employees were not high quality employees. So we had about a dozen employees, and we had to replace about 6 of them within 6 months, and then another 3 within a year. So we were left with just three or four employees a year or two later after acquiring it. And many of the franchisees were, again, they were more mom and pops than franchisees. So we had to part ways with franchisees. So today, it didn't take within 3 years, we were one of the top 100 retail chains in Canada. We had over 200 locations, and doing very well. But almost all the locations were acquired by new franchisees, not the existing franchisees. Very few of the existing franchisees ended up staying with us, and today it's still the second largest taxpayer in Canada. It has Liberty Tax has almost 300 locations last I checked, and it's household name in Canada. There's only 2, unlike the United States, where there's 3 large national companies besides ATAX. There's Jackson Hewitt and Liberty and H&R Block. Of course, in Canada, there's just 2, H&R Block and Liberty Tax. And Jackson Hewitt has never, I've never seen them try to get to open in Canada. So it looks like it's going to stay that way a long time. So again, the creativity was leaving the United States. My non-compete in the United States covered virtually every major city in the country, anywhere that I couldn't go, anywhere that Jackson Hewitt had a location, or it was worded that I knew they were going to open a location when I left. So we went to Canada. Everyone at the people at Jackson Hewitt said, no way he's going to open in Canada. And sure enough, opened in Canada, and we did, as you've seen, we did very, very well. Now, when we came back to the United States, now I had to compete against my own name, my own software, my own system, my own people. And it was funny, the same CFO was still there. And he told, I remember I had dinner with my corporate attorney there, And he said, well, Chris says that you can't do it again because, and number one is you had a electronic filing computer advantage when you started Jackson Hewitt, and it's generic now. No one has a computer software advantage in tax preparation. The mom and pops have equal tax preparation to Jackson Hewitt or H&R Block. And he said, second reason is all of the commercial space in the country is there's almost nothing left. That when you started Jackson Hewitt, then there was plenty of office space. You could rent spots in shopping centers anywhere. And then he said it's a recession, and you're never going to find people to man your offices. So 1, 2, 3 strikes you're out. You cannot compete with Jackson Hewitt. Well, not only did we compete with them, we grew faster than both Jackson Hewitt and H&R Block combined. We opened 4,000 offices in 12 years. And thinking about that in more of a day-to-day basis, we almost opened for 12 years. We almost added a new office every day. We added 330 offices a year for 12 years, and top 10 fastest growing franchise ever. And we did it based on differentiating on simplistically on guerrilla marketing. When I first started at Liberty, I just read a book called Simplicity. I mean, it's guerrilla marketing. I don't remember the author, but it's called Guerrilla Marketing. And it's a great book. It has hundreds of ideas of things you can do outside the box. And of course, one of them, the thing that set us apart quickly, is our costume dancer, our Lady Liberty costume dancer that's out on the street. And then things like having roadside parties in front of the office and going business to business dressed in costume. I had a great story this week in our ATAX training here in Virginia Beach. I just love this story of how effective it is. And when you think about marketing, there are 600,000 people in Virginia Beach, and there are 60,000 businesses. There's about one business for every 10 people in the United States, and everyone's trying to get your attention. Well, I'm nearing my time limit, but quick short story. At our basic training, we have an eagle costume here at ATAX, and the group has to put on eagle costumes and go out into the community. So there was about 6 or 7 people. They got in their costume and they went out to business. And as they left the building, funny thing, first they ran into a car and that was parked right outside of the training center. And the people said, "Oh, can we get our picture taken with you? Can we get our picture taken?" And they immediately saw the impact. But they went to the second business they went to had music. We're by the beach in Virginia Beach, and it had some rock and roll music, and so they formed a Congo line and pranced into the store. And the customer said, when he found out we were ATAX, they said, "Well, can you handle cryptocurrency?" "Sure, we can do that." And I haven't done my taxes in a couple of years. "Can you do back your tax?" "Yes." "And we need bookkeeping for our shop." And the wife is Guatemalan. She needed to get her ITIN number. For those of you who don't know, tax is a replacement for a Social Security number. She needs to get her ITIN number. So we had, in the first 10 minutes, 5 minutes, they had $3,000 worth of business by simply going to business to business. Of the 6,000 businesses or 60,000 businesses in Virginia Beach, guess how many go business to business in costume? Zippity doo dah, 0. So it sets us apart, and You have to do things different from your competitor. You have to be creative. You have to think outside the box. And that's what I'm going to leave it with this week and conclude is that think outside the box, be creative, and always be looking for opportunities. And keep in mind that CEOs need to spend 30 to 40% of their time thinking and envisioning and planning and looking ahead. And uh, that's not just fighting fires. You need to anticipate the future and create the future. Thank you. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you again next week.